Hello, everybody. We're back with our weekly chat with Kevin McAleer. uh, uh, all things literary, and we're in the middle of Raymond Chandler's novels here. And the reason I chuckled is because Kevin McAleer, his internet service in Germany is not working in Berlin, there on the outskirts of Berlin. So we do have audio together, but his video is not up. And he should be getting that fixed this week. So hopefully we'll have his very handsome, shining face back up for you very soon. But in the meantime, we're only going to have my face here and a black screen for Kevin McAleer, which is quite appropriate because Raymond Chandler did inspire the film noir tradition. So this is a definite film noir. Kevin's all in black. You can't even see him. So in the spirit of the great film noir films, let's make our own video in the same kind of way. Kevin, very good. Thanks for agreeing to this kind of odd way of doing this, but it's the only way we can do it. And let's talk about the fourth novel. We've already had a week on The Big Sleep, another week on Farewell, My Lovely. Last week was The High Window, and this week is The Lady in the Lake. Kev, you've read this book before, once or twice, or maybe more. I don't know exactly how many times, but what was your thoughts on the novel this time around?
Here I am, folks, yes. And I have no problem, actually, with not showing my face for the next 60 minutes because Tim is much better looking than I am. And I think I may be funnier than him, but that's good. And I don't have to make myself even funnier than I am by showing my clownish face.
Oh, you're too modest. You're too modest.
No, it's true. So it's also good that I can read my notes and everything without, trying to hide the fact that I'm reading my notes.
There you go.
Okay. I always had The Lady in the Lake as my least favorite Chandler novel. And why? Well, it doesn't take place in Los Angeles the whole time, or Bay City. And I think if you lose Los Angeles, you lose a lot of that aura that I love about the Philip Marlowe stories. That's why I also don't like Playback, which takes place in large part in La Jolla, what Chandler calls Esmeralda. I think those are the two books that I least like, however, for that reason. However, I did come to like it a little bit more on this third or fourth reading. It's a very tightly plotted book, and it's more in the old detective style of ratiocination, deductive reasoning, Marlowe following the clues, not just barging in somewhere and, holding a gun on somebody and then getting socked over the head with a blackjack or something. There's less of that here than in any other book. And that's probably why the great cultural historian and detective novel aficionado Jacques Barzoon, I don't know if you're familiar with him. You've certainly heard the name, Tim, Jacques Barzoon.
Darwin, Marx, and Wagner.
Right, very good. One of his greater works. And he thought this was the great work of Raymond Chandler. He thought Lady in the Lake was his best novel. So I will take that on board, what Mr. Barzoon has to say, and what I gathered in reading it, again for the third or fourth time. However, I still don't like the fact that half the time Marlowe's out of LA. I don't like that. Just takes away from the gritty, grimy glamour of it.
Kevin, isn't it a nice change of pace to have him out of LA once in a while? Can't you see the other side of that? A change of pace.
Yes, but it's not the full-on Philip Marlowe experience then.
Okay.
Every time he comes back to LA, I always get all giddy and excited. Like, here we go. All right.
Well,
Cue the
it's in
music.
last
Cue,
week.
cue that smoky, jazz music, that we want to hear as he's walking the mean streets. Down these mean streets, a man must go who himself is not mean. And in the wide open spaces of Little Fawn Lake, which I think is Marlowe's version of Big Bear Lake, Little Fawn Lake, probably. I
Oh,
think it takes place up in. I think it takes place up in Big Bear. Uh, it just doesn't do it for me at that level. Particularly then when you bring in this kind of goofy sheriff called Sheriff Patton. It's quite a name in the middle of the Second World War. Name him Patton, but he's like Patton. He packs iron on his hip. Patton had those ivory-handled pistols he always wore. General Patton, and the Sheriff Patton, he's sort of a good old boy. He chews tobacco, spits it into a spittoon near his desk. He's not the brightest fellow, but he's honest, he's tough, and he's good with his gun, as we see at the very end of the novel. So you get kind of this, it turns into sort of a semi-Western with the Sheriff Patton. And yeah, I could see the charm in that. I understand what you're saying. Isn't it a nice change of pace? Yeah, it is. And I'm glad that the novel exists. However, it doesn't have to be among my favorites. And it still remains one of my least favorite of the 7 Marlowe novels. For that reason, for that very reason. It doesn't take place in LA.
what about the
Seems
plot?
very childish on my part, I understand, but it's just the way I feel. Just telling you how it is, how it went
What
down with
about
me.
the plot? What's your impression of the plot vis-a-vis the other Chandler novels? Is this more convoluted? Is it have more clarity? Somewhere in between?
I think it has a little bit more clarity. For me, it does. Were you able to follow it more easily than the other 3 that you've
Um,
read?
I thought I was at the halfway point, but suddenly it all starts jumbling together, and there's the slipper that was lost. I didn't really know the significance of that slipper. Um, and then there was the mixed identities of this woman taking on how many identities? 2, 3, 4? I wasn't quite sure. So I was
At
not.
least 3, maybe 4. Yeah.
That was very confusing to me. So I read the novel twice. I want to make a confession right here. Of the 4 novels we've read, I read them all twice in the week or 2 that I had because, as you told me, Kevin, once you know the ending and how it all sorts out, you can start looking for those clues earlier in the novel again. So I do think all 4 of these that we've done so far bear a second reading or even a third to really understand better.
Mm-hmm. Good. I'm glad you're reading them twice, because it is kind of fun to see the detective novelist's technique, how he goes about planting clues, but not planting them in such an obvious way or making what they reveal so obvious to the reader that you spoil the fun for the reader by having him guess the mystery, halfway through the book. You want the reader at the end of the book to be surprised, but not to feel cheated. Like, you didn't give me enough clues here. So when you read so sometimes when you read a Chandler novel, it's like if you come to the end, it's like, what? you know, uh, where did that come from? Right? Like Farrell, my lovely, like you said, it turns out that Mrs. Grail is Velma. Where did that come from? But if you read it again, you can kind of think, okay, well, maybe I should have been able to, if I was really paying close attention, if I was really thinking this through, maybe I should have been able to maybe, speculate at least that are Mrs. Grayle and Velma the same person? You think that you might have been able to. So that's a successful mystery novel, I would argue, right? Because you're
Right.
totally surprised, as I was, but you can kind of go back and say, okay, well, right, all right, okay, good, got it, I see. This one, I think you can do that. I don't, you got confused, of course. One always does in a Chandler novel, whether it's the second, third, or fourth read. I think in my case, I wasn't as confused as you were, having read it already a couple times. But it is a little tricky here and there. I think maybe at this point we can clue our viewers into what we're talking about. Maybe I should give them a short little summary. Okay, it's again a case of someone coming to Marlowe, or at least Marlowe comes to him. The fellow being Darris Kingsley, and he's the vice president, executive officer, whatever, one of the head guys of the Giller Lane, or the Giller Lane, however you pronounce it, company, which is a perfume company. And he is worried about his wife, this Darris Kingsley. He's worried about his wife, Crystal Kingsley, who has gone missing. She's been missing for, even about a month, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And they're sort of estranged. She's kind of wild. She's other guys, but he still worries about her. He still, loves her in a way, I suppose. Although he's having an affair, or he had one at least, with the secretary at his firm, Adrian Fromset. And he calls in Marlowe to find his wife, find out where she went, because she just disappeared into thin air at a certain point. Well, the last place she was seen was up at this Little Fawn Lake in the San Bernardino Mountains. That's something Chandler does make clear, so probably Big Bear Lake. Where
Or
Darris,
could it be Lake Arrowhead?
it could be, yeah. I thought about that too, but it's just too cute to call Big Bear Lake Little Fawn Lake.
There
right?
you go.
So I thought he would do that.
There you go.
And it seems like Marlowe's driving a little bit further than Lake Arrowhead. It seems like he's really driving out there when he is describing the lay of the land. So they got, let's say they got a place out there in Big Bear Lake, Little Fawn Lake, and they do, Darris and Crystal, and she goes out there, to entertain her boyfriends and get away from things and the rest, and that's the last place she was seen. So what happens is Marlowe goes out there at a certain point, after having done some local investigations, interrogating one or two people. He finally goes out there to this Little Fawn Lake, and he meets up with the caretaker there, a fellow by the name of Bill Chess, who's kind of a roughneck fellow. He's an alcoholic, and he is the husband of a woman called Muriel Chess. And Muriel, like Crystal Kingsley, seems to have just disappeared at a certain point, right? And Bill's in mourning for this, and as it turns out, he had a little fling one evening with this Crystal, and that very night, his wife Muriel left him. And then that very night, Crystal left. Okay, you getting this, folks? You seeing how funny things are happening at the same time?
And another thing to mention is that Muriel Chess and Crystal Kingsley look very much like one another.
Right. The plot thickens, right? Okay. Yes, they do. Same stature, same hair color,
Both
same look,
blonde.
same age.
Yes.
Yeah. And so Marlowe's asking this Bill Chess about, what happened that night when both these women left. He explains it to him. Again, Marlowe is is milking him with drink, if that's not a bad mixed
Mixed
metaphor.
metaphor. There you go.
Yeah, it's pretty bad, milking him with drink.
I like
But
it.
anyway, he is. You like it? Let's keep it then. And he starts talking, and then at a certain point, they walk out onto this little pier in the lake. And beneath the lake, there's like a landing stage for boats. And there apparently was a Hollywood film crew there some years back, and they had dammed the lake, and it rose the level of the lake, and this landing stage is now 6 feet below water. The pier remains above water, but the landing stage is beneath it. Marlowe and Bill Chess, at a certain point, they walk out to the end of this pier, just perchance, it seems, just taking a stroll, talking, and then Bill Chess sees something beneath the landing stage, and he says, "Oh, what is that? Look at that! It's a fish! No, it's an arm! What is that?" And he gets this big rock, and he throws the rock into the off the end of the pier onto the landing stage, which sort of unsettles it, and it releases this thing, and it's a body of a woman. And they fish it out, or Bill Chess does, or even before he fishes it out, he says, "Oh my goodness, there she is. That's Muriel, his wife, who left him that night that he'd had that little fling with Crystal Kingsley, and who then herself left." And he says, "There she is." Oh, and it's, he's distraught, obviously. Well, Marlowe goes and gets the sheriff, this Sheriff Patton that I mentioned earlier, and the number one suspect is Bill Chess, and they take him into custody, take him into prison. In the meantime, Marlowe is heading back to Darris Kingsley to report on what he has found up at Little Fawn Lake. He hasn't found his wife. He found a corpse, namely the wife of Kingsley's caretaker, Bill Chess. So that's sort of laying it out at the beginning. Maybe we can leave it for now. But what you mentioned earlier about the case of mistaken identity and everything, keep that in mind, that Crystal Kingsley disappears the very same night that Muriel Chess disappears, all right? And then we can talk further about the story if we like.
Okay, well, that's a good start on the plot, and that's basically the foundation of the plot. And that brings us up to about halfway through the novel, which is where I had things clear in my head. But then as we progressed, I started to
right. Maybe that's why I stopped. I was getting all confused myself at this point. But I will say this time, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was speaking for so long. I'll just say this thing. But you can tell how I was kind of able to set that up in a fairly clear way to our viewers, more so than I have been with the previous 3 novels, because he really does set this up. I mean, it really is like Sherlock Holmes. Like, here we got it. Here's the situation. Here are the clues that will appear along the trail. Now figure it out, folks, right? It's really one where you can start thinking along with the plot in the hopes that you might solve it yourself. Whereas the other ones, you're just like, where are we? Where are we in this world of Chandler Marlowe, right? Okay, I just wanted to say that. Sorry to interrupt.
And I should have seen it coming about the mixed identity, that this body under there is actually going to be the body of Crystal Kingsley rather than Muriel Chess. We're going to find that out much later in the novel. I should have seen it coming, because Marlowe says that when the body was lifted out of the lake and put on the shore, the face was so decayed that it was unrecognizable. And it's like, okay, he can't even see the features of this woman who looks like Crystal Kingsley. Maybe I should have seen it coming,
Yes, I mean, that's the first clue that something is not right about what Bill Chess assumes is the story. That first of all, this is his wife, and second of all, that Crystal Kingsley just left, right? And if you're going to jump to any kind of conclusions without knowing why you're doing it, you might just say at that point, well, this so-called Muriel Chess is obviously Crystal Kingsley, right? Just because they disappeared at the same time, right? And that Chandler is pointing us so hard in this direction that this is Muriel Chess. What your mind automatically does is just say, well, it's probably Crystal Kingsley, or it could be the double bluff. It's like, no, he's not going to do that, that, because that would be the less than obvious thing. He's going to do the obvious thing because he doesn't think we're going to expect him to do the obvious thing, right? It really is Muriel Chess. That's what I'm saying. Right? But I don't think I had in my first reading. I don't think I was thinking that far ahead. In reading back on it, that would be the point where a veteran mystery reader would say, aha. First of all, this is not Muriel Chess. And didn't Crystal Kingsley leave the same night as Muriel Chess? They might automatically go to that just, by default of having read so many mysteries, and this is how they work out.
Yes.
And that's how it does work out. Yeah.
Now there's another woman in here with the last name, I think, of Haviland. I forget the first name.
Mildred Haviland.
And is Muriel Chess the alter ego of Miss Haviland or something?
Yes. Okay. So now we got to tell the folks the whole story. We got to go back in time, and we got to go forward in time to the solution of the crime. Okay. What has happened here is that you have this woman who switches identities on a dime. This is the femme fatale, and this is the femme fatale of all femme fatales. I read a critique of this where it said that this is Chandler's most misogynistic novel, right? I don't buy that. I mean, I think having women be killers is, they should have the privilege of being killers as well as, mothers and nurturers, don't you think? Okay, equal opportunity here. So I don't think it's misogynistic, but this is, having read all his novels, this is his arch femme fatale, Mildred Haviland. She is a real piece of work. Mildred Haviland was a nurse, and she was the nurse for a doctor called Dr. Almore. He was married to a woman named Florence, and Florence was a party girl, always getting into trouble. And at one point, she ends up, I think, at some kind of gambling casino. We're in Bay City again, by the way. Dr. Almore lives in Bay City. Anyway,
there's another guy named Lavery across the street from Dr. Almore who also is from Bay City.
Right, obviously they're across the street. I wanted to mention him, but I was going to keep him out. But Lavery, right, and then there's the Bay City cop Al DeGarmo, who is very involved in this whole story. I mean, he's one of the main characters. But Bay City cop here again. Anyway, you have this Mildred Haviland. She's the nurse for this Dr. Almore, and this Dr. Almore he's like the Dr. Feelgood of Bay City. Every time someone needs a shot of something, he comes and gives it to them, whatever it might be, morphine or whatever they're using. And at one point, he gives his wife a shot of something where she was making trouble at some, casino, brings her home, and then later on that evening, she's found in the garage beneath the car, having suffered from asphyxiation. What's it called when you asphyxiate yourself in the garage with the car?
Carbon monoxide poisoning.
Right, exactly. So they find she's died of carbon monoxide poisoning. But the question is, well, wait a second, didn't her husband, shooter full of drugs, and wasn't she up in the bedroom, and wasn't she knocked out? How did she get down to the garage and pull this one off, pull this kind of suicide off? Well, it turns out that this Mildred Haviland, who was the nurse, was also having an affair with Dr. Almore, and that she then, knowing how much you needed to administer of certain drugs to kill people, she had given then this wife of Dr. Almore, Florence, a fatal dose. And then it seems that Dr. Almore then, was it Dr. Elmer? I'm not clear on that, but I think maybe he brought her down because he knew that she had been killed by Mildred, and then he brought her down to cover it up and make it look like carbon monoxide poison. I think that's how it worked.
Like a suicide, make it look like a suicide.
Yeah, so he was covering up for his lover, Mildred Haviland. And then it was the whole thing was covered up because Almore had connections, and also this hoodlum who owns the gambling casino. He didn't want any bad publicity for his casino. Anyway, so it's covered up by the Bay City Police. Mildred Haviland just kind of disappears from the scene at a certain point. Well, lo and behold, then, a few years later, she ends up as Muriel Chess, because she just happened to meet this Bill Chess, this drunk caretaker at Little Fawn Lake. She just happened to meet him in some bar, and they fell in love and they got married. So she takes on the name Chess, and then she also changes her first name from Mildred to Muriel. Okay? Well, now she's installed out there, Little Fawn Lake. What happens then is, yes, Bill, as Bill tells the story, as Bill told the story to Marlowe, he had a little fling with Crystal Kingsley, Darris Kingsley's wild wife. Has a little fling with her. Muriel was getting kind of sick of Bill anyway. Didn't like any other woman encroaching on her territory, even if she didn't like the guy. So she kills her. We don't know how she kills her exactly, do we? I'm not sure. But anyway, Muriel Chess, the former Mildred Haviland, kills Crystal Kingsley. And then she dresses her up in her own clothes and gets her down to the lake, I guess in the middle of the night, and swims down there and gets her under the boat platform there, 6 feet beneath the water. Apparently she's a very good swimmer, could have done this, strong woman, nurse, okay. So this is her second murder. Well, as she assumes then the identity of Crystal Kingsley, she makes off with her clothes and everything. She kind of arranges things at Crystal's house and at her place to make it look like Muriel Chess has been murdered and Crystal Kingsley has gone off. She assumes the identity of Crystal Kingsley. She goes off. She goes down to this hotel in San Bernardino, and here is where the real big coincidence takes place, right? That even Marlowe admits this is one of those things in life where it just happened this way. There's no rhyme or reason for it. When she was in the lobby of this hotel, masquerading, as it were, as Crystal Kingsley, she sees this fellow you mentioned, Tim, who lived across the street from Dr. Elmore. She sees this Chris Lavery, right, who had been having an affair also with Crystal. He's a real womanizer. He had been having an affair with Crystal. I don't think he had anything with Mildred, but he knew about Mildred because she was the nurse for the Almores across the street and everything else, right? So he knew about her, and he sees her, right, in this hotel in San Bernardino. And Marlowe finds this out because he goes to this hotel because that's the last place they had found Crystal Kingsley's car. But Muriel Chess had taken Crystal Kingsley's car, and then she had parked it there, and then she had left it because then she went off on a train to El Paso where she sent a telegram to Darris Kingsley pretending that she was Crystal Kingsley, saying, I have gone off, I have eloped with Chris Lavery. Well, she had met Chris Lavery in the lobby of this hotel, and one of the bellhops told this to Marlowe, after he'd give him a little payola to, open up, she sees this Lavery there. Now, this is bad news because someone she knows sees her, and she's supposed to, in case the body ever comes up, and you got to figure the body's going to come up at some point, because she's supposed to be 6 feet under in the lake, right? She's not supposed to be alive. She was just going to make off and just not be around anymore and start a new life, probably with a new name. So this Chris Lavery has to be done away with. So next day, couple days later, I don't know, not the next day after she sees him at the hotel, but about a month later, after she comes back to LA and whatever she has to do there, I'm not clear, but she goes to his house and she shoots him. Okay. She shoots him, and then she assumes then her fourth identity of Mrs. Fallbrook. Because what she does when she shoots this Lavery guy is she comes back the next day because she wants to take in the milk. So people wouldn't suspect that, well, something's wrong. The milk bottles are stacking up there. She says that, maybe that's the reason. Maybe she wanted to do something else. But this is what she tells Marlowe, because Marlowe, at the same time, he comes back to question Lavery, because after he finds out the story about from the bar hop, excuse me, from the bellboy in the hotel, that Chris Lavery had been there. Marlowe, who had already questioned Lavery the very first day after he'd gotten this commission from Darris Kingsley to find his wife, he had gone to Lavery's place. Lavery had stonewalled him. Now Marlowe has this information. He goes back to Lavery's place. He goes in and he meets this woman whose name is Mrs. Fallbrook, and she's got a gun in her hand. And he's like, "What? Who are you?" She says, "I'm the landlady. I came to collect the rent. He's way behind in his rent." And Marlowe says, "Well, I'm here to repossess his car. He's not up on his insurance payments." So they both play these roles. And Marlowe thinks she's going to shoot him at some point, where she didn't give him the gun. She said, "I found this on the stairs." She plays dumb, like she hasn't killed Lavery. But she gives Marlowe the gun, and Marlowe's just gaga. He's like, "What?" So Marlowe it doesn't compute. So that's why he doesn't just grab her or something. He's like, "What is going on here?" Makes sense. Lavery was kind of a scoundrel. Maybe he's back on his rent. Anyway, he takes the gun. Mrs. Fallbrook leaves. He goes. He sees that Lavery has been shot. Marlowe calls the cops, and that is going a long way to telling you what this story is about, who the murderer is. It's this Mildred Haviland, Muriel Chess, Crystal Kingsley, Mrs. Fallbrook. Again, she assumes the identity of Crystal Kingsley as soon as she murders her. So that's what you're referring to, all these identities she assumes. And she's a bad, bad woman. And
So Lavery is her third murder?
It would appear so, yeah. We don't. There could be others.
These are the ones we know about.
Those are the ones we know about. But she seems to be very ready to kill anyone who gets in her way, or not even. Just it seems she killed Crystal Kingsley just because
Kevin, what about the slipper? There's a slipper involved here as a clue. Do you know what that's all about?
Yeah. The parents of Florence Almore, the wife of Dr. Almore, the woman that Mildred Haviland gave a fatal dose to, and then I'm not clear on whether she was carried by Mildred or Dr. Almore. I think it's Dr. Almore who carried her down then to simulate this carbon monoxide poisoning. The parents of Florence Almore, they suspect something, and they get a detective on the case. Well, the detective, this is years back, by the way, right? Years before the novel that we're reading. The detective sees on the shoes of Florence Almore, he gets there right at the scene of the crime, he sees that one shoe is scuffed and another is not. Okay? And they're matching shoes, but one shoe is scuffed and another is not. Well, I don't know if he figures it out right there at the scene of the crime, but he takes the shoe that is not scuffed. And I guess he then goes up to the bedroom and he gets the other shoe that is scuffed and he puts it on so that the cops don't see anything, but he's got the unscuffed shoe. What does that mean to him? It means to him that, in other words, this woman had two sets of shoes that were the same, right? And one she had worn and one she hadn't. And the idea is that when the people who had killed her, or the person who had killed her, Mildred Haviland, or maybe it was just Dr. Almore carrying her down there. I'm not clear on that,
Yeah.
how that worked out. But they didn't look closely enough. They didn't get the shoes that she had worn, the pair that she'd worn. They took one shoe of the pair that was held in reserve and they stuck that on her foot. So this guy saw that and he said, well, she didn't come down here on her own 2 feet because there's a gravelly path there or something that you have to walk down. Even if you wore the shoe just for the very first time, and there'd be little scuff marks on it. So he took that, he saw, well, no, she got carried down here. She was killed either beforehand or here then with the carbon monoxide, but she didn't commit suicide. He took this evidence to the parents, but then the Bay City police, they shut it down again for reasons I said, they didn't want the case to air. And then, they ruined the detective.
Due to an endemic corruption in that police force, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So that's it. So you can tell. So you can tell again these little clues, like the shoe, and then there's a little anklet that Marlowe finds in a box of sugar, and
wasn't it baking soda? I thought it was a box of baking soda.
I think it was was it? Okay, good. I thought it was confectioner's sugar, but it doesn't matter. It's
either way.
Either way, it's a white,
a white substance,
powdery stuff.
Yeah.
And he finds a little anklet. It says from Al to Mildred. Al turns out to be this corrupt Bay City cop. His name's Al DeGarmo. Apparently, she was married to him at some point. This woman gets around. And he was looking for her, and this is where the plot starts to get less clear and more convoluted. But anyway, yeah.
Kev, didn't DeGarmo murder someone according to the plot?
Well, it seems he murdered Mildred Haviland. Yeah, going back to her original name.
And why was that?
Yeah. It's unclear to me because it's a very strange murder, and maybe we can talk about this. What happens at a certain point, because we're about 3/4 into the novel, and if you're an unattentive reader like I was the first time, and like most of us, then you're still thinking that Muriel Chess is dead. She was the lady in the lake, and you're still thinking that Crystal Kingsley is at large. Well, at one point, Darius Kingsley, he contacts Marlowe and he says, hey, I just got a phone call from my wife. And Marlowe said, you're kidding me. Well, thanks. I guess the search is off, right? You know where she is? He said, no, I don't necessarily. And even if I did, she wants to blow town. She wants to go missing again. And Marlowe says, did you talk to her? She says, no, I didn't talk to her. But my secretary, Adrian Fromset, spoke with her on the phone, and she says she wants $500, and again, $500 multiplied by 10 back then, it's about $5,000. So she wants $500 as a stake and she wants to blow town and, you know, just get out of here. And she doesn't want me to bring it though. Okay. And so I thought that you could bring it to her, because this guy's still, he really seems like he's still kind of in love with his wife, right? The marriage is on the rocks. You know, he doesn't want to stick it out with her either. But you know, he still has a little bit of love remaining that he doesn't want to see her, you know, anything befall. He doesn't want to see anything befall her. So he gets Marlo to take the $500, and he's going to be meeting with her in a bar, and this is all set up by Adrian Fromset, the secretary. Okay, so Marlo's supposed to wear the scarf, a certain scarf of Darris Kingsley, so that Crystal Kingsley will recognize him. Marlo goes to the bar. This woman, Crystal Kingsley, sees him. They go out of the bar together, and she says, "Where's my money? I got to get out of here. Give me my money." He says, "I got a few questions first, if you don't mind. Then you can get your money." And she says, "Okay, good, but we're not going to talk here. Okay, go up to my apartment. Okay, give me 10 minutes." So she goes up to the apartment. He sits in his car, waits 10 minutes, drives up, goes up to the apartment. He comes in. And then that's where we get a lot of the mystery being revealed. That's where Marlo is talking to her, right? And he's getting answers from her. And she's giving him answers because she intends to kill him, okay? He's going to be murder number 4, right? Mr. Marlo. And that's that scene I read several videos back where he says, "I don't like this scene," you know. And she says, "Well, how about," because you know, you always tell this scene it's always where the murderer, you know, where she tells him all the details of her murders, and then she intends to kill the detective at the end of the scene, but somehow she never does. And then she says, "Well, how about in this case, I don't tell him anything and I kill him?" And Marlo says, "Well, I still don't like the scene." And that's where the mystery outs. We hear all about it, and Murder tells her, "Hey, you were Mrs. Fallbrick," because he recognizes her now. He sees her. This is Mrs. Fallbrick. This is the woman he met in Lavery's house, right? There's no hiding it at this point, even though she was kind of made up funny as Mrs. Fallbrick and whatever. Okay, he sees that, and there's a struggle over her gun. She's about to shoot him. And in the midst of the struggle, Marlo gets sapped, knocked out. He wakes up, he's covered, he smells of gin. Someone has dumped a bottle of gin all over him to make him look like he's drunk. And he finds, and we're finally getting to your question, he finds then Mildred Haviland, Muriel Chess, Mrs. Fallbrook, Crystal Kingsley, choose your name, but he finds the naked body of this Mildred Haviland, let's say, this nurse for Dr. Elmore, who killed his wife with an overdose. She's there, she's stripped naked, and she has claw marks on her stomach. Very odd. And apparently she's been throttled because her tongue's out and her eyes are bulging. But then these scratches, right? And, you know, Marlo has obviously been framed for the murder, whoever did it. And he gets out of there eventually, and it's very tricky how he tries to do it. But it turns out that this Al DeGarmo is the murderer of Mildred Haviland. And he had been her husband. He'd been still in love with her. Apparently, she'd done him wrong, as she had apparently done many men wrong, even as far as killing them. And then he's the killer of her. But it was unclear to me why he would do that. Maybe just his frustration with the woman, and it just all came out. And, you know,
And he in turn is killed in a car accident near the very end of the novel, right?
Right. Because Marlowe kind of finesses it. Yeah. Well, DeGarmo comes back. They take Marlowe into custody, or DeGarmo does, and Marlowe pretends that DeGarmo, although I think he pretty much knows that DeGarmo is the killer of Mildred Haviland. He's figured it out, through this little anklet that said, from Al to Mildred. It's a long story, and he says, well, let's go back to Little Fawn Lake. I'm sure that the killer of Mildred Haviland can be found there. Oh, he doesn't say Mildred Haviland. He said, I'm sure that because he's still pretending that this is Crystal Kingsley. Marlowe's still pretending this is Crystal Kingsley, although he knows otherwise. And he tells DeGarmo, well, that's Crystal Kingsley there on the bed. I'm sure her husband, in a fit of rage, finally couldn't take it anymore, and he just killed her, right? Because look what I have here. And he holds up his scarf that Kingsley had given him to wear around his neck. Now, if DeGarmo was the killer, he knows all this. He saw the scarf. It wasn't on Marlowe's neck at that point. It was in his pocket. But, he knows all this. He knows it's not Crystal Kingsley. He knows that Darris Kingsley did not kill Crystal Kingsley because it's Mildred Haviland, and he knows that it isn't Darris Kingsley who killed Mildred Haviland because he killed Mildred Haviland. He was hiding behind the curtain there in the apartment the whole time. I don't know if she knew he was there. I don't know if she assented to him being that he was there. That's all. That's the unclear part. This whole Al DeGarmo section. I don't know why exactly he would have killed her. But anyway, he does because he pretends he loves her. And so then Marlowe gets him back to Little Fawn Lake, and then there's a showdown between Sheriff Patton and Al DeGarmo. They actually, they draw. It's a quick draw kind of contest. Patton wins, and shoots the gun out of DeGarmo's hand. DeGarmo takes off in a car, and it's during the war. So they got this dam blockaded at both ends. You got some MPs out there, and they tell him to stop. He doesn't, and then they shoot at him, and he drives off the dam, and he crashes and dies. And that's that story. The story's over.
That's the very last line and chapter of the novel is the death of DeGarmo off an embankment. He's caught at the bottom of some ravine. Okay, Kev, you did an admirable job.
So indirectly a fourth murder at the hands of Mildred Haviland, because Al DeGarmo was involved in this whole thing because of his love for her. Right?
Ah, okay.
Now he killed her.
So even in death, she's a femme fatale.
Yeah, she's the worst femme fatale of all the femme fatales in the Chandler novels. No question about it.
Okay, now you told me before in one of our chats about various novelists, I forget who, you said part of making a great novel is it has to be believable. It has to be realistic. You have to believe these things can happen. Is this a little bit far-fetched, this plot that we've just, reviewed here?
No, I mean, there's always a suspension of disbelief in any work of fiction because, as we also mentioned earlier, nothing happens this quickly. The concatenation of events can mean over years. This happens over a few days. So you suspend your disbelief at that level. And all these things are plausible. Sure, a husband can mistake a corpse for his wife.
Well, Kev, I'm talking about
if she's decayed for a while.
The plausibility I'm speaking of is that this woman would be the murderer of all these people with all these changed identities. I was just wondering if that was a bit far-fetched in the plot.
Not for me. How about for you? It was okay.
It was a surprise, let's put it that way. I don't know if it's unrealistic. women can be cruel just like men. That's obvious.
Of
In my
course.
own story, I've had that happen. My own book
Yeah.
I wrote that I haven't published has that kind of femme fatale theme to it in some respects. So I personally think it can happen, but to assume all these identities and to be knocking off all these people is just like it's a big wow when you realize it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, well, I don't think any mystery story is completely devoid of some real stretches of the
Yeah.
imagination.
Well, let me ask you this, Kev.
Uh,
We've only got about 8 minutes left. What about the
mhm.
what about the title of the novel, The Lady in the Lake? Good title, bad title, somewhere in between?
Oh, it's a very good title. You know, I mean, Lady of the Lake, right? Arthurian romance. You know all about that.
Sir Walter
Presented
Scott.
Arthur Keller. Sure, and Tennyson, Idylls of the King, right?
Oh, that's right. And
Where
I read in the
they
Wikipedia
toss the
entry, Kev,
playback.
I read in the Wikipedia entry on Lady in the Lake that it was consciously done to imitate the title Lady of the Lake. So again, we have our Arthurian theme here.
Right. I like it. I think the title is among the better ones, and certainly better than the High Window or the Little Sister, as we discussed last time.
A little more
So yeah,
poetic.
a little more poetic, and I I picked up on something that you have mentioned before in terms of little leitmotifs, like the pink polka dot bug and uh,
The little
the
Negro
the little
uh,
Negro
in front of the
jockey,
house.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Pasadena, right. I picked up on another one here. It's right on the first page. Maybe you picked up on it too. When he's going into the Giller Lane Company's office, a neat little blonde sat off in a far corner at a small PBX. Do you know what a PBX is?
No.
Some sort of telephone connecting, thing. I don't know what it is. It's an old, outdated thing. So a neat little blonde sat off in a far corner at a small PBX behind a railing and well out of harm's way. At a flat desk in line with the doors was a tall, lean, dark-haired. Okay, that's not important. But anyway, he gets back to the little blonde. I grinned at her. The little blonde at the PX cocked a shell-like ear and smiled a small, fluffy smile. She looked playful and eager, but not quite sure of herself, like a new kitten in a house where they don't care much about kittens. And then we meet her again because he's making periodic visits to this office. And let's see, where do we meet her again? I got it marked. Yeah. The Giller Lane Company's reception room looked even emptier than the day before. The same fluffy little blonde was tucked in behind the PBX in the corner. She gave me a quick smile, and I gave her the gunman's salute, a stiff forefinger pointing at her, the three lower fingers tucked back under it, and the thumb wiggling up and down like a Western gunfighter fanning his hammer. She laughed heartily without making a sound. This was more fun than she had had in a week. And then he's coming out of the office, and he writes, after he's getting some bad news, I walked back down the room and out. The little blonde at the PBX looked at me expectantly, her small red lips parted, waiting for more fun. I didn't have any more. I went out. So he's having a little fun with the little blonde at the PBX, wherever the PBX is. So that's again like our little Negro jockey. It's like our little pink polka dot bug.
He does use the leitmotif technique to good effect. That's for sure.
Good humorous effect. That's right. Nice little touches here and there.
Most definitely.
So,
Kev, we got 4 minutes. Anything you'd like to say in conclusion here?
ooh, Well, I do know, I looked this up, so it's not my own knowledge, but he put this novel together out of three short stories. Three, count them, The other ones he'd usually use two, I think maybe three in one case. But his cannibalizing, once again, of his own works. This, The Lady in the Lake is the product of Bay City Blues from 1938. The eponymous Lady in the Lake, 1939, and No Crime in the Mountains, 1941. And he did a good job of it this time. I think he didn't, it's not as confusing. I mean, the pieces fall more into place. My only, than in the others, I would argue. My only problem with the plot is I don't see Al DeGarmo killing Mildred Haviland. I don't understand that quite. But again, can't have all the pieces fit perfectly all the time.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay. I guess I'm out of questions here, and we've got a few minutes
Yeah.
left, but I can
Well,
say
I could also,
oh, okay, go ahead.
yeah. No, go ahead. I have nothing to say.
One thing I noticed was a couple more aspects of Chandler that we haven't spoken of. Sometimes he tells us Philip Marlowe's dreams, and those dreams are kind of interesting because they're kind of a surrealistic touch. I'll read one of the dreams here after he
Sure.
investigated the lady in the lake for a little bit and all the terrible things associated with that. He said, I dreamed I was far down in the depths of icy green water with a corpse under my arm. The corpse had long blonde hair that kept floating around in front of my face. An enormous fish with bulging eyes and a bloated body and scales shining with putrescence swam around, leering like an elderly roue. Just as I was about to burst from lack of air, the corpse came alive under my arm and got away from me. And then I was fighting with the fish, and the corpse was rolling over and over in the water, spinning its long hair. I woke up with a mouthful of sheet and both hands hooked on the head frame of the bed, and pulling hard. The muscles ached when I let go and lowered them. I got up and walked the room and lit a cigarette, feeling the carpet with bare toes. When I had finished the cigarette, I went back to bed. So this is an interesting thing in Chandler is the dream sequences. I've seen that happen a few times in other novels. So just another aspect that it's
Yeah.
kind of surrealistic little touches here.
Yeah, he does that in The Big Sleep. From the very beginning, he's doing that with the dreams. And then, of course, how he wakes up in that private hospital in Farewell, My Lovely, having been drugged for a couple of days, and he sees cigarette smoke, from floor to ceiling, and then the lamp comes alive. It's little men poking their heads out over the edge of the lamp. So all this, sort of, this mystical, these mystical visions he has,
Yes.
are ever present. And I think it's also a nice touch too, because you realize that Marlowe he's a very human guy. He's not just the cool, tough talking, witty PI. He's a guy who feels, he's a guy who suffers. It's not all fun and games for him. He's got that his great virtue is that he's tough as nails, right?
Right.
His great virtue is that he can slug it out with the bad guys, right? But he's a human, right? He's got a heart, right? And we see this here, and I think those are nice, revealing little episodes. I like them very much.
And there's one.
And here's one last thing. Yeah,
okay,
go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say there's one other touch that he does when he's beat up and he's kind of left injured. and blacking out. When he wakes up, he says, I smelled of gin, not just casually, as if I had taken 4 or 5 drinks of a winter morning to get out of bed on, but as if the Pacific Ocean was pure gin and I had nosedived off the boat deck. The gin was in my hair and eyebrows, on my chin and under my chin. It was on my shirt. I smelled like dead toads. And then he gives us what I would call a tension breaker here. He says, my coat was off and I was lying flat on my back beside the Davenport on somebody's carpet, and I was looking at a framed picture. The frame was of cheap soft wood, varnish. Here, I have to take my glasses off to read this. And the picture showed part of an enormously high, pale, yellow viaduct across which a shiny black locomotive was dragging a Prussian blue train. Through one lofty arch of the viaduct, a wide yellow beach showed and was dotted with sprawled bathers and striped beach umbrellas. 3 girls walked close up with paper parasols, one girl in cerise, one in pale blue, one in green. Beyond the beach, a curving bay was bluer than any bay has any right to be. It was drenched with sunshine and flecked and dotted with arching white sails. Beyond the inland curve of the bay, 3 ranges of hills rose in 3 precisely opposed colors, gold and terracotta and lavender. Across the bottom of the picture was printed in large capitals, "See the French Riviera by the blue train." It was a fine time to bring that up. I reached up wearily and felt the back of my head. It felt pulpy, and so on. So he puts these kind of like, I call that a tension breaker. He's been knocked out, and when he wakes up, he sees a picture, and instead of just saying, I saw a picture and then felt my head, he goes into long detail about it as if to break the tension.
Yeah, he's giddy. He's goofy. This is just like in Farewell, My Lovely, where he wakes up in that private hospital, which I just cited. Yeah, he has these visions. He's seeing things. He's delusional.
Having
Uh,
dreams.
yeah, yeah, he's just got conked on the head. I mean, we have to do a conked on the head-o-meter at some point for all the for all the novels put together. I mean, he must get conked on the head a good 24 times in all the 7 novels. He's constantly getting sapped and blackjack. Poor guy.
But he's waking up
Um,
with these surrealistic visions or dreams, which is something new to the detective novel, I believe.
well, yeah, he is, but he's seeing that, Tim. I mean, he's also seeing that, and maybe he's seeing more in it than actually meets the eye. But that's a picture he's seeing. I mean, he
No, I know,
pretends
I
he's
know.
seeing.
I'm
Right,
talking about
right. But
the
he's
passages where he has these dreams or visions. This to me,
right.
I call this passage I just read a tension breaker, because it we're in the
Yeah.
middle of a very tense episode and he suddenly goes off on a diversion there about the painting and what it looks like in great detail. It's interesting to me.
Yeah.
All
No,
right,
very
Kev,
interesting. No, these are the little touches that would never have gotten into Black Mask.
there
And
you
I just want
go.
to leave you with
Okay,
one last thing.
okay,
It's very, very quick,
okay.
very painless. The One of the hallmarks of Chandler is his great use of slang. And what I said in an earlier video was that he will use slang, he'll put it into the mouths of his characters, but oftentimes he will play with it, particularly in the mouth, when he puts it into the mouth of Philip Marlowe. So he won't just use the slang term, but he'll play around with it. And here's an example. We talked about Chris Lavery. Greg is a guy I went to high school with.
Okay.
Chris Lavery. And he's a real womanizer, and he's a good-looking hunk of man. And Marlowe's talking here. Lavery goes off in his car, and Marlowe's watching him from his own car. Mr. Christopher Lavery was bound for the edge of the broad Pacific, to lie in the sun and let the girls see what they didn't necessarily have to go on missing. Think about that. What you would usually say in that place is, and let the girls see what they were missing, right? but then he gives it a little twist. He goes, and let the girls see what they didn't necessarily have to go on missing, because he's a womanizer, right? Come on, girls, come on, get it, right? So he puts that little twist into the slang phrase, you know, because I would argue it's a slang phrase, or it's at least a vernacular, a colloquialism. It's a nice touch, because it's not only playing with the slang in a clever way, but it's also revealing the character of this fellow. You know, he's a
Yes.
womanizer. He'll take anything that comes his way, right?
Well,
So once more, Mr.
that-
Christopher Lavery was bound for the edge of the broad Pacific to lie in the sun and let the girls see what they didn't necessarily have to go on missing. Anyway,
and
an
people,
example of playing with the slang.
and people don't necessarily have to go on missing our videos either. So I'm glad we have another one in our pocket here. So,
Right.
Kev,
See what they make of this one. Yeah.
yeah.
But
Well, thanks,
I had
Kev.
fun.
This was interesting. We went a bit over time, but it was worth it.
Yeah.
And hopefully you'll get your video back up next time, or we'll have to do this with the film noir version of our video with yours blacked out. We'll see how
I
it
hope
goes.
so. If the German technical people come through, then we'll be up and
Okay.
running next weekend.
And next week will
Okay.
be The Little Sister, right?
The Little Sister, which is one of my top 2 or 3 favorites.
All right, Kev, we'll see you next week. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thanks, Tim. See you later.
Bye-bye now.